You were targeted before you even knew it. Words were spoken in secret, meant to bind, drain, and delay you. But what if I told you there are 5 words they fear more than rituals? I've seen curses activated, and I've seen them shatter instantly. This is not theory, this is insider truth. Stay here, because what you're about to hear breaks everything spoken against you. You need to understand this first truth before anything else. Curses do not begin with rituals. They begin with words. I learned this on the inside. Before candles, before symbols, before altars. Words were released first. Spoken words are assignments. They are legal permissions. They are spiritual contracts. That is why you felt pressure you couldn't explain. Resistance that didn't make sense. Delay that followed you from season to season. Someone spoke something, and the spirit world listened. Here is what most people never realize. A curse only has power if it finds agreement, not your awareness, your agreement. Agreement can be fear. Agreement can be silence. Agreement can be ignorance, and witches know this. I watched curses fail, not because the witch was weak, but because the target spoke something stronger. Words don't just communicate, they create. That's why the first thing the enemy attacks is your mouth. He wants you quiet. He wants you confused. He wants you speaking doubt instead of authority. Because once the right words are spoken, everything changes. Let me expose something dangerous. Curses operate on borrowed authority. They don't have their own power source. They leech off spiritual laws. When someone speaks against you, they are trying to establish dominion. They are attempting to override your covering. But there is a higher law, a higher authority, a higher name. And this is where the first word comes in. The first word that breaks curses is Jesus. Not as religion, not as tradition, not as a casual mention, as authority. On the inside, we knew this. We were warned about it. Not the name itself, but the belief behind it. Because when that name is spoken with understanding, it triggers immediate disruption. I've seen rituals collapse mid-session, candles extinguish without wind, oppressive pressure lift instantly. Why? Because that name represents rulership. It announces ownership. When you speak it with faith, you are declaring jurisdiction. You are saying you no longer have permission here. And permission is everything, but here's the mistake many people make. They whisper it. They doubt it. They treat it like a magic word instead of a legal declaration. That's why nothing happens for them. Authority must be asserted, not hoped for. When a curse is spoken, it expects silence in return. Silence equals consent. But when you speak that name boldly, you interrupt the assignment. You force a spiritual review. And curses hate reviews because they rely on speed. They rely on secrecy. They rely on you never realizing what's happening. This is why sudden attacks often come at night, or during emotional weakness, or during confusion. The enemy wants you disoriented, because a disoriented person doesn't speak with clarity. But clarity is lethal. Say the name with conviction, and you don't just defend yourself, you reverse the flow. Now listen carefully. The second word is blood. This word terrifies the dark realm, not metaphorically, legally, because blood represents covenant. Every curse operates under a covenant system. That's why sacrifices exist. That's why exchanges are made. Blood seals agreements, but there is one covenant blood that overrides all others. When you declare the blood, you are invoking protection, cleansing, and cancellation at once. You are saying, this does not belong to me. This cannot remain. This has no claim. I watched witches panic when someone understood this. Not because of shouting, but because of precision. Precision destroys rituals. When you speak the blood covers me, you are closing access points. Access points are emotional wounds, generational patterns, unconfessed fear. The blood seals those doors. That's why curses often target trauma, because trauma leaves openings. But the blood closes what trauma exposed. Then comes the third word. This one is subtle, but devastating. The word is cancel. Dark rituals thrive on continuation. They assume the assignment will keep running. Canceling is a legal command. It stops motion. It freezes progress. It voids authorization. When you say, I cancel every word spoken against me, you are not praying. You are issuing a notice. A notice changes everything. In the spirit realm, words are recorded. Declarations are logged. When cancellation is spoken with authority, the curse is forced to disengage. But only if you mean it. Half-hearted words do nothing. Curses recognize certainty. That's why you must speak clearly, firmly, without apology. Now listen to this closely. The fourth word is revoke. This one reaches deeper than cancel. Cancel stops activity. Revoke removes rights. Revoke strips permission permanently. When you revoke, you are saying, even the memory of access is gone. This is why some people experience recurring attacks. They cancelled activity, but never revoked rights. So the door kept reopening. Revoke shuts it. I watched this word end long-standing generational patterns. Cycles that ran for decades stopped because the legal ground was removed. You must understand this. The enemy cannot stay where he has no rights. He can intimidate. He can bluff. But he cannot remain. And finally, the fifth word. This is the word that seals everything. The word is amen, not as tradition, as confirmation. Amen means it is established. It is finalized. It cannot be altered. When spoken with faith, amen locks the declaration into place. Without amen, words can remain open-ended. With amen, they become law. This is why rushed prayers fail. People don't close what they open, but you will when you speak these 5 words with understanding. You are not reacting anymore. You are ruling. And that is what breaks every curse. Now that you understand the power of the words, you need to understand the battlefield. Because curses don't just float randomly. They follow patterns. They exploit timing. They strike during vulnerability. On the inside, we studied targets, not randomly, strategically. We watched for moments of exhaustion, moments of emotional collapse, moments when faith dipped and doubt spoke louder. That's when words were released. Because spoken curses seek echo. They look for internal agreement. That's why you've experienced sudden heaviness after certain conversations. Why progress stalled right after breakthrough was near. Why peace vanished without warning. Someone spoke and something responded. But here's what shifts everything. When you speak first, the atmosphere changes. Words don't just follow events. They create them. This is why spiritual warfare is not about defense. It's about position. Curses can only operate where authority is unclear. Confusion creates opportunity. That's why the enemy attacks identity before destiny. If you don't know who you are, you won't know what you're allowed to command. Let me expose something few people know. Curses feed on cycles, repeating patterns, generational loops, financial collapse, broken relationships, chronic delay. These are not coincidences. They are patterns waiting for interruption. And interruption happens through declaration. This is where the 5 words move from reaction to preemption. You don't wait for attack. You establish boundaries. When you wake up and speak authority, you are drawing lines the enemy cannot cross. I watched curses die before activation because the atmosphere was already occupied. Occupation matters. Dark assignments cannot enter territory already claimed. This is why consistency is critical, not repetition. Alignment. You don't chant, you establish. Now hear this carefully. One of the greatest lies taught is that silence equals peace. It doesn't. Silence equals vacancy, and vacancy invites intrusion. When you don't speak over your life, someone else will. That's not fear, that's law. This is why witches target children early, not with rituals, with words, labels, predictions, declarations of limitation. Because words spoken early become foundations, but foundations can be demolished. When you speak those 5 words over your past, you are not revisiting trauma. You are reclaiming territory. I've seen adults break childhood curses in moments once the right words were spoken with understanding. Time doesn't protect curses. Ignorance does. Now, let me reveal the most dangerous phase. After a curse is broken, there is always a counterattack. Not to regain power, but to test resolve. Fear surges, doubt whispers, symptoms try to return. This is not failure. This is proof of disruption. When the enemy can't operate legally, he tries intimidation. That's why many people think the curse came back. It didn't. It was evicted. And evicted forces try to bluff. This is where the 5 words must be spoken again. Not desperately, but decisively. Authority increases with use. Confidence grows with results. The more you speak, the clearer your spiritual voice becomes. Clarity is terrifying to the dark realm. Confused people are easy targets. Clear people are dangerous. Now listen to this. Curses weaken when exposed. They rely on secrecy. That's why even hearing this activates something in you. Awareness shifts alignment. You are no longer passive. You are alert. And alert people don't fall easily. This is also why resistance often spikes when truth is revealed. The enemy hates exposure. Exposure accelerates collapse. When you understand the system, you stop fearing the symptoms. You stop chasing manifestations. You deal with the source. And the source is always words. Spoken words, believed words, agreed words. That's why from this point forward you must monitor your mouth. Not out of fear, out of authority. You don't speak defeat. You don't speak limitation. You don't echo curses unconsciously. Because agreement fuels continuation. You break agreement by speaking truth. Truth is not volume. It's alignment. Aligned words reshape reality. And now you're stepping into that alignment. You're not hoping things change. You're declaring they already have. That shift is dangerous to the enemy. Because hope waits, authority acts. And you are no longer waiting. Now we go deeper. Because breaking a curse is not the same as staying free. Many people experience a moment of relief. That confusion when pressure tries to return. That's not failure. That's transition. Curses don't leave quietly when they've occupied space for a long time. They test boundaries. They probe for weakness. They look for cracks. This is where most people lose ground. Not because the words didn't work, but because their position wasn't secured. Let me expose this clearly. Freedom must be maintained by authority, not emotion. Emotion fades. Authority stands. On the inside, we knew exactly when a person was about to reclaim control. It wasn't when they cried. It wasn't when they begged. It was when their voice changed. When fear left their tone. When certainty replaced desperation. Curses recognize tone. They can hear doubt. They can sense hesitation. But they cannot survive confidence rooted in truth. That's why the enemy attacks consistency. He doesn't need to silence you forever. He just needs you quiet long enough. Long enough to reinsert suggestion. Long enough to rebuild agreement. Long enough to make you question what already worked. This is why you must understand the role of daily declaration. Not repetition. Alignment. You are not reminding God. You are reminding the atmosphere who is in charge. Atmospheres shift based on who speaks most clearly. When you consistently speak the 5 words, you are reinforcing jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is everything in spiritual warfare. Without it, no spirit can stay. With it, no curse can return. Now hear this carefully. The enemy often tries to re-enter through self-talk. Thoughts that sound like your own voice. Questions that seem logical. Doubts that feel reasonable. This is subtle and deadly, because if he can't get you to agree out loud, he'll settle for internal agreement. That's why your inner dialogue matters. What you say to yourself in silence can reopen doors you close publicly. This is where the word revoke becomes critical again. You don't just revoke external attacks. You revoke internal lies. You say, I revoke every lie trying to rebuild what was destroyed. And something shifts. I watched people remain oppressed not because curses were active, but because lies were unchallenged. Lies sustain residue. Residue creates symptoms. Symptoms create fear. Fear invites agreement, and the cycle attempts to restart. But cycles break when truth interrupts them. Now let me show you something strategic. After a curse is broken, there is a vacuum, something left. Space opened, and space must be filled. If you don't fill it with truth, something else will try. This is why worship, gratitude, and declaration are not optional. They are occupancy tools. You fill the space with light. Darkness has nowhere to land. But if you leave the space empty, you invite contention. This is why some people feel restless after breakthrough. They mistake emptiness for peace. But peace is not empty. Peace is full of presence. Presence displaces opposition. Now listen closely. The enemy also targets memory. He brings up the past, old mistakes, old failures, old identities. Why? Because identity confusion weakens authority. If he can get you to see yourself as who you were, you won't speak like who you are. That's why the word amen is more than a closing word. It's an identity seal. When you say amen, you are saying this is who I am now. This is established. This is not up for debate. Debate is the enemy's playground. Authority ends debate. This is also why environments matter. Some places are saturated with old words, old arguments, old declarations of defeat. When you re-enter those environments, pressure can increase. Not because you're weak, but because the atmosphere remembers. That's when you must speak again. Not aggressively. Authoritatively. You don't fight atmospheres, you override them. And atmospheres obey clarity. Now understand this. Curses cannot coexist with sustained truth. They require contradiction. They require double-mindedness. That's why the enemy loves emotional instability. Up one day, down the next. But stability terrifies him. Stable authority is immovable. And stability is built by repetition with belief, not frantic repetition, confident reinforcement. Each time you speak those 5 words, you are reinforcing structure. Structure collapses chaos. This is why disciplined believers are dangerous, not loud believers. Disciplined ones, the kind who speak whether they feel it or not. The kind who declare even when symptoms try to argue. Because symptoms lie. They are the echo of something that already lost its rights. Don't chase echoes. Stand in truth. And now hear this final warning for this point. After freedom, opportunity increases. Favor attracts attention. Growth attracts resistance. This does not mean a new curse is forming. It means your influence is expanding. An expanded influence requires expanded authority. So you don't retreat, you don't shrink, you don't go silent. You step forward with clarity. You speak before fear speaks. You declare before doubt whispers. And that's how freedom becomes permanent. This is where everything comes together. Because the final stage is not about breaking curses anymore. It's about walking in dominance. Most people stop at freedom, but freedom is only the doorway. Authority is the destination. On the inside, we feared people who didn't just break curses, but who knew. They were untouchable. Because once you know that, your posture changes. Your presence shifts. Your words carry weight. before you even speak them. Curses are intimidated by certainty. Now hear this carefully. There is a moment when the enemy realizes you are no longer reacting. And that moment changes everything. When you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start declaring, this is not permitted, you move from victim to ruler. That transition is dangerous to the dark realm because rulers don't negotiate, they enforce. This is why many people struggle even after learning truth. They want peace without responsibility, but authority requires ownership. You must own your spiritual territory, your mind, your home, your relationships, your future. Ownership is declared, not assumed. And this is where the 5 words become a lifestyle, not a rescue tool. You don't wait for trouble to speak Jesus. You establish him at the beginning of every day. You don't mention the blood only when afraid. You cover everything before fear has a chance to rise. You don't cancel only visible attacks. You cancel assignments before they reach you. You don't revoke only after damage. You revoke access permanently. And when you say amen, you don't hope, you finalize. This is what witches cannot stand. Not loud prayers, not emotional reactions, but calm, immovable authority. Because calm authority signals confidence, and confidence exposes the truth. They have no power over you. Let me say something critical. Once you step into authority, the enemy's strategy changes. He stops attacking directly and starts sending distractions, busyness, weariness, offense, subtle compromise, not to curse you, but to silence you. Because silence is the only weapon he has left. That's why you must guard your consistency. Not perfection, consistency. You don't need to shout every day. You need to stand every day. Standing is louder than shouting. Now listen closely. There will be moments when nothing seems wrong. No pressure, no heaviness. That's not the time to relax your authority. That's proof it's working. Peace is maintained by vigilance, not fear, awareness. This is why disciplined authority creates longevity. People who remain free for years aren't the most emotional. They're the most grounded. They don't chase manifestation. They establish order. And order suffocates chaos. Now understand this final revelation. Curses cannot touch purpose once authority is established. They can no longer delay. They can no longer divert. They can no longer confuse. Purpose becomes protected. Momentum accelerates. And acceleration exposes every remaining lie. This is why breakthrough often feels intense at first. You're not under attack. You're outgrowing resistance. And growth always creates friction. But friction doesn't stop motion. It proves it exists. So from this moment forward, you stop wondering if something was spoken against you. You already know the answer, and you already know what to do. You speak, not in fear, not in desperation, but in finality. Because when you speak with authority, the spirit world listens. And curses don't survive where authority lies. You are not a target anymore, you are a threat. Every word spoken against you has lost its grip. Your mouth now carries authority, not fear. Stand firm. Speak boldly. Enforce what is already yours. No curse can return where permission is gone. This is your ground. This is your moment. And it is finished.